Why do health headlines often get it so wrong? One day you'll hear that red meat causes cancer. Another day you hear that red meat doesn't cause cancer. Another headline says eating eggs causes heart disease and cardiovascular death. Another few weeks later, another study says eating eggs has no effect on heart disease and cardiovascular death. Why do the headlines flip-flop like that all the time? Getting it wrong, getting it right, and you can't even tell. Well, there's a basic fact to know about, and that is the studies they're talking about are something called observational studies. Now, before your eyes glaze over about this, I'll make this short and to the point. Observational studies are, just as the name suggests, observations. And observations you cannot control for all the many variables in people's behavior and lives and health. For example, the drug Premarin is a very good example of this. The drug Premarin, for many years, was the most widely prescribed drug in the world for about a decade, made billions of dollars for the manufacturer. This was because observational data suggested that women who took Premarin had less endometrial cancer, less breast cancer, less heart disease and death. Those conclusions came from observational studies conducted like this. Jane, do you take Premarin? Yes, I do. Mary, do you take Premarin? No, I don't. Two different kinds of people, one taking the drug, one not taking it, but they were self-selected, right? They chose to go on it or chose not to go on it, and they were watched for a few years, and there appeared to be less cancer and cardiovascular death. Then two real studies were performed, not observations, real studies, in which women were given a pill and were not told what it was for 5 years, and the researcher or the person dispensing the pill didn't know what it was either, removing bias in behavior and words, and then after 5 years, they were told what they were taking. Well, when the study was double-blind, person dispensing, person receiving, both were blinded to what they were getting and controlled by a placebo. Some people got the Premarin drug, some people got placebo. There was more endometrial cancer, more breast cancer, more cardiovascular death and events, and acceleration of dementia. In other words, when the real studies blinded, participants were blinded, the dispensers and the researchers were blinded, and it was controlled against placebo, the exact opposite findings were made when compared to the observational data. This happens 8 times out of 10. In other words, 80% of the headlines you hear where eggs cause heart disease or something like that are disproven in the prospective trials. Now, unfortunately, not all questions can be answered in a clinical prospective trial. For instance, smoking or nitrites in meats. To prove whether these observational studies were true, in smoke, you'd have to have smokers versus non-smokers start at the same time as non-smokers, right? And some people are assigned smoking, others are not. But the observation data was so overwhelming that smoking caused heart disease and lung cancer that even the observational data, because the effect was so powerful, was acceptable. With nitrites, we have to do this, have 2 groups of people eat meats and blind them to whether they had nitrites or not, and see which group has more cancer. You can see the problem there, right? No one would enroll because no one wants cancer. So we have to rely on the best observational data. And we look for certain patterns within the observational data. Is there a graded dose response? The more you're exposed, the more likely it is you have disease. There's some other ways you can try to weigh the data and see if we can extract real findings. But as a general rule, observational data are almost as good as no data at all in most settings. Now, the only way to tell if a study is based on an observational study is if you look at the study itself or look to reliable sources to comment on whether this was an observational study and thereby highly unlikely to be true, or whether it was genuine clinical data. So if you want more lessons like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or join my conversations in my Wheatbelly blog, my Wheatbelly Facebook page, Undoctored blog, Undoctored Facebook page, and the true deep dive into health in my Undoctored Inner Circle.